Okay. Hello, welcome. Welcome to the Teach Access Student Academy 2025. We're thrilled to have you here. My name is Kate Sanka. I'm the executive director here at Teach Access, and I'm joined by our incredible team. We have Leslie Johnson, who's been really the heart behind this, driving things. You've gotten some emails from her. We have Rolando Mendez, our director of education. We have Mindy Colin, our director of development and strategic partnerships. We're all here. They will be behind the scenes helping field questions as things come up, but wanted to make sure you could see the team and say hello virtually to them. We're so glad to have you here. We've had, at least as of this morning, more than 1,000 people register for this event, this two-day event, which is thrilling for us. We're beyond excited that you are choosing to spend your time over the next 2 days together in community with us, learning about accessibility and disability. Um, we really believe now more than ever, this is so important given things that are happening here in the United States and the uncertainty that a lot of us, many of us, are facing, especially around some of our disability rights, disability justice, accessibility. So your presence here today is so appreciated and so wonderful to have you here wanting to learn and participate. We have an excellent lineup of speakers today and tomorrow. We have 6 sessions each day. This keynote will be one of the longer sessions. The others are a little shorter. And you'll hear more about those as we move through the day. You can always refer to our website for the schedule there. As we get into it, we wanted to make sure that we thanked our sponsors for helping keep this event free to you to attend. That includes our presenting sponsor, Merck. We also have support from Verizon,
Hey,
Microsoft,
I say,
Google.
Kate, I'm sorry to interrupt. There
Yeah.
were some people saying they were having difficulty with
Oh,
captions. Are we okay now? Can everyone see the captions?
testing, testing. Is it okay?
Yep, I think we're good. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
Okay. No, no apologies. Thank you for putting me on pause. Want to make sure that things are operating as they should. So again, want to thank our sponsors, Verizon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Salesforce, and our presenting sponsor, Merck. As we just experienced, we do have captions, we do have transcripts here. You can click that bottom caption button, which is a CC and a square to access those. We do have ASL interpretation today. You can find the interpretation button at the bottom menu bar. It's an icon that looks like a globe, and click that, select American Sign Language. A window will pop open and you can move that screen around. We are utilizing the Q&A feature because we have such a large crowd. You can access that along the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A with a question mark in a small box. Please send your questions throughout. If there are things we can answer up front, we will, or towards the end, Lainey and Haben will be able to answer those. If there are any other questions, concerns, accommodation requests, please use that chat feature and message directly to us as the hosts, and we will help you out there. And finally, this session will be recorded. It's already being recorded, and will be made available to everyone after the event. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled for this keynote session. I'm going to turn it over to Lainey Feingold, who will get it going. Lainey is a disability rights lawyer. She's been working to make this world more accessible since 1995 and beyond. We're thrilled to have her here. She is one of our board members, board of directors members at Teach Access. So we have the wonderful privilege to be able to work with her very often. So with that said, Lainey, I would love to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and good morning, everyone. I'm in Pacific time. Yes, I've been at it since 1995, which is why my visual description is basically I'm a white woman with gray hair rapidly turning to white. I am a disability rights lawyer, and it is my real thrill to be here with my friend and my colleague, Haben Girma. And Haben is someone that you will learn so much from. And there's many things to say about Haben. I really encourage you to visit her website, which is Haben, Haben, Girma, Girma, no space.com. I'll just pull out a couple highlights, which is her wonderful book. If you haven't read it, really highly recommend it. It's called Haben, I want to get the exact words right, the deaf-blind woman who conquered Harvard Law. And I really love the book, and I want to share with you that on Haben's official bio, she also reports that the book was praised by the New York Times, Oprah Magazine, one of my favorites, Today Show, and Steph Curry. So if that doesn't encourage you to get the book, I don't know what will. Haben has been a champion of change. She's gotten a lot of attention, well-deserved attention for her messaging, which she fortunately has been able to share throughout the world. And I'm so thrilled that she is here to share it with Teach Access, especially as Kate said, it's been a very challenging time here in the US. And to me, and I know to Haben, nothing is more important than community in these times. So one last thing to say about Haben in connection with that is that she has been asked to serve as a commissioner for the World Health Organization's Commission on Social Connection. And I think that says it all. I'm going to turn it over to Haben. And when she's done, we're going to have a conversation and we'll take your questions. We'll be paying attention to the Q&A. So Haben, over to you.
Hello, are we on? Are we unmuted? We are. Excellent. Thank you so much, Lainey, Kate, all of the Teach Access team, and everyone who chose to spend our time together. You could be doing anything else with your time, but you chose to be here with us. I am going to talk a bit about communication. I'm deaf-blind, living in a sighted hearing world. So I've always had to think about communication. How do I get access to audio information, to visual information? Most things around me, organizations, places, are designed for people who can see and hear. So I had to come up with alternative, non-visual and non-audio ways to gain access. And my sense of touch is excellent. I was blessed to have access to Braille instruction. So I found that by using technology that has Braille and connecting that to a keyboard, I could have access to spoken words through Braille. So in this presentation, we're doing that. We have a keyboard, the Braille display, and during the Q&A, you will hear Lainey reading questions, and I will respond after I read the questions in Braille. There's going to be a delay, and we often have cultures that pressure us to be fast and set values based on speed. But that's not the best environment for allowing everyone to contribute their talents. So as we create accessible spaces, we also need to be mindful to make time for different voices, different paces, and different ways of accessing information. So we're going to role model that in our conversations. The whole purpose of this time is to help you better understand the different elements of accessibility And that's why we're making time for Q&A, so you could have your questions answered. Before we get into that, I will tell you some accessibility principles. This is an ongoing conversation. As tech evolves, new tools become available and new problems emerge. So we have to regularly have these conversations about accessibility so we keep learning. So we never stop learning about accessibility, about communication. What words do we use? Do we say disabled, special needs, differently abled? All around the world, people have different words to describe disability. And I was taught, don't say disabled, that's a bad word. In fact, the word itself has DIS. And in English, when you have DIS in front of another word, you make it negative. But that's actually not true. There are many English words that start with DIS and are positive or neutral. I'll give some examples. Display, discussion, discover, Disney. Language evolves. We choose how we identify, what words we want to use. And disabled had many negative connotations for a long time. But advocates today, especially in the US and many other places, are embracing the word and changing what it means from something positive to something neutral and everything in between. So I am choosing the word disabled. I identify with the word disabled. Check in with your communities. The chosen word may be different in India, China, Spain. So we need to adapt our language as it changes and based on what the disability community in our local communities are calling for. Another part of language is, do we use identity first or person first? Should we say people with disabilities or disabled people? And the call for person first is based on the idea that we should remind everyone that disabled people are people. But I feel in 2024 and 2025 and all future years, we should know that, of course, disabled people are people. We shouldn't have to keep reminding ourselves that we're people. So hopefully that is accepted information and we can move on to describing disabled people the way we describe other identity groups. If I can say, I am a woman, instead of the more cumbersome, I am a person who is a woman, then why not also being able to say, I am disabled, instead of the more cumbersome, I am a person who is disabled. I actually use both in my book and in talking about accessibility. I use both person first language and identity first language. Language is evolving, and as writers and speakers and artists, we have the flexibility to keep dancing with language and use it in many different ways. But this, once you have the knowledge, then you have the choice to use words, how words work. So I want to move on to tech, but tech is closely tied to people. So we will keep talking about our communities in addition to talking about tech. So as a deafblind person, I'm constantly advocating for Braille, and I want to give a quick visual of the Braille tech I use. Can you bring up the first photo? So this is a photo from the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'm standing at a table reading from a Braille computer. And those of you who know Braille tech, this is a Braille note. And across from me in the photo, President Obama is typing on a keyboard. And when we went into that meeting, we told him, I access information best through Braille. Normally, President Obama communicates by voice, but he graciously switched from voicing to typing so I can access his words. That is a very small change from voicing to typing. A lot of accessibility starts out with small changes. When we are able to have our colleagues or instructors or classmates make small adaptations to make our communities more accessible or websites and apps more accessible, it makes it easier for them to take the next small step and the next large step to make our communities more accessible. Disabilities are opportunities for innovation, and we have several frameworks for encouraging our communities to embrace accessibility. And one argument you can use is letting people know that disabilities are opportunities for innovation, especially in technology. A lot of the tech we have was sparked by disabilities. If you can't do something one way, that's an opportunity to come up with a new way to communicate or experience the world. For example, for a long time, blind people didn't have access to books. Then emerged books on tape. And today, many sighted people enjoy listening to audiobooks, which originally emerged as something extremely specialized for the blind community. When we have some kind of challenge, particularly sparked by disability, that's an opportunity to pause and reflect. How can we make this in a different way? How do we access this in a different way? So if you are trying to convince more people to invest in accessibility or learn about accessibility, you can share with them that it helps increase innovation. Another brilliant argument is that we reach more people. There are over 1.3 billion disabled people around the world, a huge market. And that is one of the largest untapped talent pools. So those are two strategies you can use to help encourage people to continue learning about accessibility. For many of us, disabilities are not the barriers that prevent us from accessing technologies. The barrier is ableism. Can you bring up that slide? ABLEISM. It's the set of beliefs and practices that treat disabled people as inferior to non-disabled people. We're not inferior, but that is what ableism tells people. So when someone builds a website and doesn't plan for accessibility, or they build a high rise and don't plan for people with mobility disabilities living in that high rise, those are examples of ableism. Sometimes people say, well, we didn't mean to discriminate. We just weren't thinking about people who use wheelchairs or people who are blind. But not planning for accessibility is part of ableism. That is part of the issue. So I have been advocating for the removal of ableism in our communities. Once I realized that ableism was the main barrier, but I didn't always know that. I struggled to figure that out. I worked really hard in school, and I was ready to try having a job, just like many of my classmates in college were getting jobs. But they were getting hired, and I wasn't. And my grades were excellent. I had volunteer experiences, I had great references, but still, employers didn't want to hire me. It wasn't that I couldn't do the jobs. These were tactile jobs, like washing dishes, folding laundry. When I was a kid, I told my parents, I can't do chores. Blind people can't do dishes. They didn't fall for it. I still had to do dishes. So I had lots of experience in this field. These are tactile, so you can touch a plate and feel if there's something there. You can feel the stickiness of soap. So blindness was not the problem. The problem was ableism. Employers assumed there's only one way to do it, by sight, and they weren't willing to consider that blind and deafblind people could wash dishes by our sense of touch or accomplish many other tasks in alternative ways. It was ableism that was holding back employers from winning brilliant, talented people to join their teams. We need employers to remove ableism from their hiring practices, promotion opportunities, and all aspects of the organization. I kept trying to find someone who would hire me, but there was so much ableism, so much assumption of, oh, there's no way she could work here. There's no way she could access our websites, our digital platforms. There's no way she could do emails or answer phones. One day, I found a manager who said, how would you do the job? I told her. She listened, and she hired me to work the front desk of her small gym. That summer, I learned a lot about gym equipment. One day, a woman came up to the front desk and said, a treadmill isn't working. I followed her to the treadmill, and I felt the machine from top to bottom. Near the bottom, there was a switch. I flicked the switch, and the machine worked to life. She told me, oh my goodness, I didn't see that switch. I told her I didn't see it either. Sometimes tactile techniques beat visual techniques. When we have teams that access information in different ways, when we have teams with people who think in different ways, then we have stronger teams that solve more problems. Ableism is the heart of the problem, and ableism also gets baked into tech because not enough people are learning about accessibility. So assumptions get baked into tech, and a lot of AI tools exist right now and are going to continue emerging. Ableism gets baked into AI. And as we work on that, we need to make sure we remove it from the tools we build. I will share some examples. So there are a lot of tools out there where you can take a picture and use visual AI to read the text in the picture. But tools like ChatGPT can read English. They can read print English, print Italian. But if presented with Braille in English or Braille in Italian, it's not able to read it. Braille in a picture is visual patterns. AI excels at patterns. So it's not that the tech is not, it's not that this can't be done. It's that someone has not planned for Braille access. Someone wasn't thinking about blind people who would want to know what's in a picture, or even sighted people who would want to know what's in a Braille message. So beware of ableism. It is sneaky. It's our assumptions that think, oh, disabled people wouldn't be in this space, or disabled people wouldn't be able to do this. We need to make sure we're designing for everything to include disabled people. All around the world, disabled people have been creating and innovating different types of solutions. And there's a diversity of solutions because disabled people are diverse and our experiences are different all over the world. I visited Instituto Tecnológico de Sonora, a university in Mexico. Can we share a video? So this is a video from the university, and I am signing with a friend who was a student back then, but now is a teacher. He's deaf and sighted, so he can see my signs, and I'm holding my hands over his hands to feel his signs. I do not know Mexican Sign Language. So Yair, the young man in the video, is my interpreter when I am interacting with the deaf community in Sonora, from Mexican Sign Language to American Sign Language. Deaf people are often interpreters. Blind people are often guides. Disabled people are also helpers. And part of ableism is that it tells us that disabled people can't help. But if you study communities all over the world, disabled people have been helping in many different ways. I also visited a school in India. This is the National Institute of Speech and Hearing in Kerala, India. Photo, please. So in this photo, we have a few hundred people in an auditorium smiling and signing ILY. I'm also in the photo with my dog. We're both smiling. And ILY is a sign that started in the United States and means love, respect, admiration. Through technology, through international travel, many deaf communities around the world have also been learning American Sign Language. And sometimes people ask, well, wouldn't it be easier if all deaf people use the same sign language? Well, wouldn't it be easier if all hearing people spoke the same language? When we are developing accessibility programs, it's tempting to flatten disabled people and say, oh, all deaf people should use this accommodation and all blind people should use this accommodation. But we are incredibly diverse, and solutions that work for one community may not work for another community. So accessibility is about providing a variety of different opportunities to connect. So supporting different sign languages, supporting different different ways of accessing Braille and written material. It's also continuing these conversations because we're continually learning about new disability experiences and new accessibility options. So it's an ongoing, continual conversation. speaking of conversations, many of you submitted questions for Lainey and I. And Lainey, can you come back on screen? And maybe we could start addressing questions people sent us.
Thanks, Haben. Audience, you sent beautiful questions. And I'm going to get to them in 1 second, but I have to celebrate one thing Haben said, which was not enough people are learning about accessibility. And since this is a Teach Access gathering, and since the goal of Teach Access is to get more people to learn more about accessibility, as a board member, I just want to thank you for that statement, and I will suggest to the team it could perhaps be our tagline for Teach Access, because I totally agree with you. Not enough people are learning about accessibility. Okay, so for the
We're
questions.
helping to change that. We're getting more people to learn. And I feel many of our audience here will be ambassadors and advocates, teaching more people to keep learning about accessibility.
Exactly, which brings me to the first question I want to ask you from people who submitted in advance. If you're in this room, you are an advocate for accessibility. And as someone who's been in it for a long time, I want to thank you for that. It's hard work. It's often unrecognized work. It's often work that's not your job, and it is work that is so important. So, Haben, two of the questions about advocacy, one from Peter. We're going to be using your first names who submitted the questions. Someone named Peter asked about how to be a better advocate for students and graduates with invisible disabilities, like learning disabilities. And then I want to put that together with Grace, who, in addition to saying how proud she was of you, Haben, in your advocacy work, wondered about how we can bridge the gap, how we can be better advocates for deaf learners in deaf institutions. So advocacy for people with learning disabilities and people who are deaf.
Great questions. So I feel like a lot of the accessibility that has happened in the past focused on more visible disabilities. And I feel like part of our culture is starting to feel more comfortable with visible disabilities. But there's still so much stigma around non-apparent disabilities, such as learning disabilities. And it is really, really powerful when speakers with learning disabilities, non-apparent disabilities in different forms are invited to schools to come and speak to students about their lived experience and their strategies for success. Having more conversations, having face-to-face opportunities, even virtual face-to-face opportunities, helps people feel more comfortable learning, continue to learn, that there are many different ways for us to learn. So I would love to have more of that. Also, sometimes deaf and hard of hearing and hearing disabilities also fall into the non-apparent category because it may not be apparent right away. So it would be great to have more visibility for the deaf community, especially deaf advocates who have built up experience teaching and training around accessibility for the deaf community. Lainey, you often advocate that it's really important to help people get into communities where we can sit down and learn from people who are different from us. I think you wrote about that in your book, Structured Negotiations. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you, Haben. I appreciate you referencing my book. As a disability rights lawyer, my focus has been on digital accessibility, primarily with the blind community for all this time. And I haven't done lawsuits, but instead have done a collaboration practice. And when I wrote the book, I realized, like Haben just said, the reason collaboration has worked really boils down to creating the space, a safe space for disabled people and decision makers to be in a room together. And I think, Haben, that's what you do in all your talks. You're in a room with people. So people can't just think, oh, blind person, deaf blind person. They think Haben Girma. And that has been really the key to everything I've worked on, from talking prescription labels to talking ATMs, is getting decision makers to understand, like Haben said, the diversity of disability, the needs of people who are disabled. And as our friend Lucy Greco, who will be speaking tomorrow at this gathering, she always says that, if you can have lunch with people, they get you, and that's a real opportunity for all of you to be thinking of how you can create these opportunities on your campuses and elsewhere to have these kinds of conversations where people can know each other. Haben, are you ready for the next question, or did you want to say more about this?
Well, I wanted to add that speaking of lunch, that reminds me that a lot of amazing learning happens at community opportunities to get together around delicious food. For example, if schools, high schools, middle schools, colleges, and universities have clubs where disabled people and allies can come together around food and talk about their lives, accessibility solutions, ableism on campus, what they could do together to make the community more accessible. Those kinds of clubs, more of them are emerging now. I actually did not have access to that when I was in college, and once was re-emerging at my last year of law school. But I've heard from many students that those kinds of clubs are powerful. So if your university does not have a disability, a group where disabled students and non-disabled allies can come together to talk, you can help start such a club, because that would be powerful for your university.
I think that is a good segue to a question that came in on the Q&A today from Sophie. When times are tough, like they are now, how do you stay motivated to continue the accessibility work? How do you stay motivated to continue your advocacy?
I advocate for accessibility because it's important. It's important that people have opportunities to read, to participate in their communities. Tech, when it's accessible, facilitates access to so much in our world. So this is really, really important. And it's also exhausting. And when times are tough, it is crucial to keep advocating and also take breaks when you need to, so you can recharge and get back into the critical work. When you take breaks, you can tap into the experiences that bring you joy. For me, that's dancing, it's walking in nature, it's eating delicious food. It's different for everyone. So find the things that bring you joy. When times are tough, it's extra important to tap into those joyful experiences, take breaks, and then get back into the important work. How about you, Lainey?
Well, first of all, it's a great question. And I have always been an upbeat, optimistic person. I know that's in there still, and these times are very challenging. For me, community like this one here today is essential to remember that whatever part of the work we're doing matters, like Haben said, and contributes to a global accessibility community that is strong, that is kind, that is committed. And so it's very easy to forget. I work at home. I worked at home by myself, no staff for the last 30 years. It's like you're doing your little thing. It's like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. And then just to step back a little and remember that we're part of something global. And shout out to the people on this call who are from other countries. I happen to just see someone checked in from Kenya. And one of my joys is that many mornings I wake up with emails or texts or social media posts from people in other countries that are doing the same thing, that are reaching out. I think right now, reaching out to each other is really important. And just to second what Haben said about joy, I follow a professor in Pennsylvania named Desmond Patton, and he teaches a class called Journey to Joy and recommends a joy plan. And so I have written a digital accessibility joy plan. It's on my website, which is lflegal.com. And I think we all need, like Haben said, it's all individualized, but we can't lose sight of the importance of what we're doing. I think that's the bottom line. Yeah, but it's a really good question. Haben, another question, which comes in from Christy, who it's clear from her question that Christy, I don't know if you're on this call, is very committed to getting description of images right. We call alt text. There's an understanding that you have to always describe pictures. And Christy asks, when you're using illustrations of people and people are, like she says, she works extensively with people from a variety of minoritized backgrounds. When we use illustrations, what are your best practices for describing skin tone, racial background, and gender? She's identifying as a white queer person. They're identifying as a white queer person. And we don't want to make assumptions about description, but we don't want to leave the default to white cisgender. So do you have any tips on alt text when you don't know the person? If you do know the person, of course, they can describe themselves.
Excellent question. So, I want to share a story, but before I share a story, I will say that I am a Black woman in my 30s wearing a black dress with buttons along one shoulder, and I have a blue curtain behind me. A story. Once upon a time, a blind friend was an acquaintance. And while getting to know me, the acquaintance asked, "Have you ever traveled?" And I said, "Yes, I was just in Sweden. I have lots of family in Sweden." And throughout that summer, he assumed that I was a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Swedish girl. Some people think, oh, that's because of blindness. But actually, it's because society has trained many of us to assume that if we hear Sweden, we think white, or if we hear European or read European, we assume white. And for a lot of descriptions in books and visual descriptions that are given to the blind community, whiteness is assumed. And when we are creating accessible content, we don't want racism baked into the descriptions that we write. We don't want people to assume white is the default or assume specific genders as defaults. So what we want to do is we want to ask people, how do you identify? And then put their people's preferred descriptions into those descriptions. And when we don't know how people identify, and we're not able to ask them how they identify, there are different standards written. I think the Smithsonian wrote one guide, but essentially it's write what you see, not what you assume. So if you see light skin tone, dark skin tone, you can write that without assuming a race. You could also, it's also important to be careful to not use countries. So if you don't know someone is Chinese, don't assume an Asian person is Chinese, or even use Chinese or a country unless a person specifically asks you to do so. Because again, there are lots of different people and experiences within countries. So those are some guidelines and things to think about. Lainey has also thought a lot about this. Well, what do you want to add, Lainey?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Haben. I just give a shout out to one resource, which is called Disabled in Here, and it's a stock photo site primarily of people of color, disabled people of color, queer people, many of them, and you can get the photos for free off of that, and they do the description for you. And they have a very clear description, and they're a disability-led organization, so you can see how they do it. They know the people, so it's slightly different, but I think it can give us all some ideas. I have a article on my website, lflegal.com, about stock photos for diversity, and I list free and paid places where you can find stock photos, and some of them have the descriptions. So that's another way to learn how people are doing the descriptions. But I love that it does boil down, right, what you see, not what you assume. I think that's a good guidepost. And also, I love the phrase, calling people in instead of calling people out, because maybe you'll get it wrong and maybe someone will say something about it on social media. But as long as you're calling people in, I was called in on something where I described someone, I didn't use the right gender language, and they said, I'm going to call you in. I didn't ever hear of calling in. It's kind of like when you point something out to bring people into the community instead of pushing them away because they made a mistake. And I think that gets back to Haben's idea of language and always trying to, give people the benefit of the doubt that they're trying and add people to our communities rather than make people afraid of our communities. Okay, so let's see. So many good questions here. There's a good question here from Anne Marie about, Haben, do you have any stories of failed accommodations where people tried but didn't get it right?
There's so many stories. I think a classic one that many blind people can relate to is Braille that's only visual, Braille that you can't actually feel. And I've noticed this happening in accessibility spaces too, where they might have a sign that has visual Braille, but blind people can't read it. And that is frustrating. It's also happened on like signs by doors where you'll have uh the print based numbers and then braille based numbers under that, just in visual braille that you can't feel. So that's a classic accessibility fail. There are also examples of people assuming, oh, if we're having a deaf person, we should have American Sign Language. And then it turns out the person doesn't know American Sign Language. So ask people what they need and then double check that and make sure that actually works for the person. Lainey, do you have an accessibility fail story?
I do. And I can say my entire career in digital accessibility is based on an accessibility fail, which is that when the ADA was passed, the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, there was a reference to blind people being able to use ATMs. And as a result of that language, banks led by the American Banking Association all over the country put Braille on the ATMs. And Braille can have useful information about ATMs. You can say, hours of operation, but it doesn't give you what you need to operate the ATM because the ATM screens are dynamic and the Braille isn't telling you what's on the screen. So, my whole career started with working with the blind community on getting talking ATMs, which were truly accessible and only happened because we had so many blind people who got in the room with bankers to explain, I can't get $20 of my own money out of this ATM because you put on Braille, maybe it was well-meaning, but it doesn't work to make it accessible. So without lawsuits, we ended up getting talking ATMs, and now they're built into the regulations. So that was a major fail. And Haben, your story and my story actually give me a chance to recommend a new book that's coming out on March 4 in a couple weeks by Haben and my mutual friend, Josh Mealy, who is blind. His book is called Connecting Dots, and it will have real Braille on the cover. So that's one thing I want to say about it. On the hardback, I think it's just coming hardback and digital and audio right now. And also, when Josh was a younger person at UC Berkeley, at the time when there was Braille on ATMs, he had a stamp made up that said, "Don't believe the Braille." And in the dark of night, he would go around to ATMs and take that stamp and take a stamp pad and put that on the ATM screen. So Braille is a wonderful thing, and Josh believes in it, and it works, but it doesn't work for everything. And that's my fail story. Okay, next
I
question.
have
Oh,
one more.
sorry, go ahead, Haben.
I have one more accessibility story I want to share. And Lainey and I have talked about this a lot, but a very frustrating accessibility fail for a lot of disabled people is when websites want to be accessible and use an overlay on their website using an automated accessibility plugin overlay that they hoped would make their website accessible, but actually doesn't. And for many of us, it actually makes the website harder to use. Two of these overlay companies, one is called XSEB, the other is called Userway, and they're both facing lawsuits right now because so many people assumed they would make their websites more accessible. But unfortunately, that was a major accessibility fail, and many people, disabled people, are struggling to use websites with these overlays. So that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning overlays. Again, on my website, I have stories about both those lawsuits, as well as a lot of resources that you can use to share with people about, the problems with overlays, the harms with overlays. And there's something called the overlayfactsheet.com where you can find a lot of resources and a statement signed by many of us around the world about problems with this. The sad thing is, once you know what it is, you'll notice it on a lot of the websites you visit. So this is an ongoing place for advocacy. Haben, a question that came in from the audience here about accommodations in events. So many events or processes offer the invite for attendees to share any accommodations that they need, which at first puts the onus on the disabled person to share their needed accommodations. Do you have a best practice approach that doesn't ask people to have to disclose and ask for accommodations? What's the best way for organizations to include people in a welcoming way? This is kind of how I would summarize the question.
So I have a lot of experience with that. It is more welcoming when you put up front what accessibility you can expect. So on the flyer, on the website invitation page, registration page, put up front accessibility information. Is the venue wheelchair accessible? Are the bathrooms accessible? What is public transportation like? Is there accessible parking? Will there be sign language interpretation? In which language? How about CART? Captioning? What kind of captioning? So put that information there. And then also have information on who to contact for accessibility questions, because there will be accessibility needs you didn't think about, or accessibility needs that are new because tech has changed or our world has changed. So make it easy for people to be able to communicate about accessibility. So that's how we can make it more welcoming. The norm is to not share that information and to put the burden on disabled people of always having to ask. Many of us have to be like accessibility choreographers, interacting with interpreters and captioners or personal care assistants, SSPs, support service providers, to try to coordinate all of that for our accessibility. And organizations that provide accessibility information upfront are so much more welcoming and reduce the amount of work we have to do. Excellent question.
A couple questions about Braille that I'll put together here. Thank you, everyone, for really good questions. Someone asked if you could mention something about the difference between Braille 1 and 2 and how to ensure that organizations get Braille readers with lived experience to evaluate and test Braille so it comes out as it should. And then there's another question about what is the best Braille device for people in middle school, 11-year-olds. Can you give some insight on what you used when you were younger? Kind of different, sorry. They're kind of two different questions, but they're both about Braille. So there you go. Off to you.
So Braille 1 and Braille 2 is something we have in English Braille, and I've learned that many other languages do not have that, but some do. There's also Braille 3, but very few people know that. So Braille 1 is, how would one describe that? It's basically the easiest form, most accessible form of Braille. No contractions. So if you did not finish your Braille training, but know some Braille, probably you know Braille 1. Braille 2 is Braille with contractions. So Braille 2 is more condensed, it's shorter, and it's what it's what many experienced Braille readers use. So stories about accessibility fail. I requested Braille for an event for a script. So it was Braille I had to read on stage, and I forgot to specify that it should be grade 2. I just kind of assumed, of course, the transcriber would know to do grade 2, but they chose grade 1, and that actually was harder for me to read. So I could read it, but it was slower, and it required more mental gymnastics on my part to try to read grade 1 in a setting like that. So ask people what kind of Braille they need. If you have the ability to give both options, give both options. If you are doing signs, if this is for like Braille signage or materials in museums and you can only do one format, you should probably do grade 1 because more people know how to read that. But if the option is available, give people the choice and provide both, because faster, experienced Braille readers are probably more comfortable reading grade 2 compared to grade 1. And the next part of the question was, what type of Braille displays? There are lots of different types of Braille displays. And those of you working on Braille support for different types of software, make sure you support as many different Braille displays as possible. When you are picking out a Braille display for a student, give that student choices. Ask them, would they prefer to be able to type in Braille, or would they prefer to type in a QWERTY keyboard? I actually prefer typing in QWERTY. I am more comfortable typing in QWERTY, but other blind people are more comfortable typing in Braille. And there are Braille displays with Braille keyboards, some with QWERTY keyboards. So ask them what they need. And as a student, I was carrying my bag from classroom to classroom, on and off campus, and heavier Braille displays were harder on my shoulder and back. So I preferred smaller, lighter displays. So also check in with your students. Do they need something that's lighter and more portable, or do they want a bigger display? There are places where people could check out lots of different displays, like the conventions held by the National Federation of the Blind and the American Council of the Blind. CSUN, a conference in Southern California, also has lots of different Braille displays that people can touch and experience. And if something like that doesn't exist in your area, maybe you could help organize an accessible tech fair for people to come and test out and learn from the vendors who provide these different types of tools. Thanks for that question.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left before I'm going to turn it back to Haben for some closing. There's a few questions in here about legal issues like the European Accessibility Act. What impact will it have on United States companies, about the DEIA executive orders, what impact that may have on accessibility issues. Just want to let people know that I'll be doing a digital accessibility legal update for the AXCON conference, which is next week. It's free to register. It's recorded, and I'm going to try in 40 minutes to answer all those questions in this environment. So I invite you to check that out for any legal questions that you have here. There's also a really good question about the relationship between accessibility for people with disabilities and people who are seniors. Haben, do you have anything on that you want to share?
I want to remind everyone that accessibility is global. Many different countries have laws requiring accessibility. And if you work in an organization that is global, and maybe such as in the US, there are lots of people wondering why should we invest in accessibility, and it feels like cultures are changing, but our laws are still there. The Americans with Disabilities Act has been in the US since 1990, and in the EU there's an Accessibility Act. And when you have a global organization, there are multiple legal forces urging you to keep designing for accessibility and building accessibility into all our products. So we have global advocates we can lean on and learn from to make sure that what we're designing helps people with all different kinds of bodies and minds all over the world. I'm a big fan of the legal updates Lainey writes. I regularly follow her website, which is full of great posts. And Lainey, you wrote about the European Act, right?
Yes, I was going to say I have a whole page on my website, lflegal.com, dropped off the top menu, Global Law and Policy. And that page is a symbol of the community that I think Haben and I are, one of our takeaways here is you're here, you're advocates, you're a part of this global community. And so I have a page with resources from as many parts of the world as people have sent me information about. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. I see we're out of time for questions, but we're going to save these questions and perhaps we can talk about maybe answering some of them offline in a way for the audience. A recent one came from South Africa. So I just want to, again, thank the people here from outside the United States. Thanks for your support of Teach Access. Haben, just so wonderful to be on a virtual stage with you again. And I want to turn it back to you for your closing thoughts for this community.
You have invested time with us, and this is how we continue learning about accessibility. Lainey and I have been doing this work for many, many years, and we're still learning. We're continuing to learn. And one of the ways I learn is by following many disabled leaders on social media. So as new problems emerge, I get to read how people are solving them real time and new solutions that come up. I also read many books by disabled people and people working in the accessibility space. So, for example, a really great book is The Anti-Ableist Manifesto by Tiffany Yu that came out last year, and it's a guide on how to notice ableism when it comes up in schools, in tech, in restaurants, in shopping. Ableism is sneaky and it's everywhere. So it's really important we build up our skills to be able to notice it and remove it from our communities. I learned a lot from Tiffany's book, even though I've been doing this work for a long time, because everyone has something new to bring to the conversation. So that's a great book. Another great book, of course, is Lainey's Structured Negotiation. And that talks about what do you do when organizations say no to accessibility and no to disabled people? How do you get them to move from no to yes and invest in accessibility? So structured negotiation is also a great resource. And if you have more time, I've also written a book called Haben, the Deaf-Blind Woman Who Conquered Harvard Law. And it uses stories to show how ableism and sexism intersect, or how ableism pops up in the job market. A lot of people say, wow, you overcame your disability to go to Harvard. No, I'm still disabled. It was Harvard that had to overcome ableism. They've come a long way over the years, but they still have more work to do. And all of us still have more work to do to remove ableism from our communities. So thank you for taking the time to continue learning. And there will be more classes throughout this workshop. And I hope you enjoy the rest of our seminar. Lainey, back to you.
Thank you, Haben. Thanks again to each of you for, like Haben said, spending time here and feeling this incredibly powerful community here in the Zoom room and all around the world that's doing the hard work, but the needed work of making the world more inclusive. Kate, back to you.
Hello, everyone. This is Kate from Teach Access. What an incredible session. I can't thank you enough, Lainey and Haben. This was, as always, I learn from you both every time I get to hear you speak and share your knowledge and your thoughts and your experiences. I hope our audience really got something out of it today. We were thrilled to see the engagement in the chat and the Q&A. So thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. A couple pieces of housekeeping as we end this session. Stay tuned. Our next session will begin in about 15 minutes. So if you are in Eastern US time, that's about 12:30 p.m. If you are on Pacific time on the West Coast, that will be 9:30 a.m. This session is going to be a good one also. I think all of our sessions will be great. This is going to be an introduction to disability inclusion with Alan Heil, a great colleague and great friend. He is going to cover an introduction to disability inclusion from the basics of disabled identity and definitions to demographic breakdowns and sources, and fundamental philosophies of why disability is a vital identity to build inclusive environments. So whether you are new to accessibility and disability, or you are a seasoned professional, I know that you'll pick up something new as you listen to Ellen present. I want to thank everyone for being here. Again, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our interpreters and captioner. And we will see you back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you, everyone.